Good evening. Welcome back to The Bible Speaks Today from LBC Television Ministries. As always, and you know, those of you who watch regularly, and if you don't, this will be an inspiration, hopefully, or whatever. We record these programs in pairs, sometimes in triplets, but mostly in pairs, where we record a program, have a coffee break and a chat, and then we come back and do the second one. So, which is why I'm always wearing the same clothes for 2 weeks. You know, I do have other clothes. We thought one day we would actually have a spare shirt here and change the shirt, but then we thought we'd confuse everybody, so we didn't. However, during the break, of course, I always go in and say, so how was that? Because obviously they've been sitting the other side of the glass, avidly listening to everything I said and picking out the shots. Actually, usually they're talking about some technical stuff and not paying any attention at all. But anyway, one of the more astute people in there said, well, they're both astute actually, but you know, one of the biblically minded, no, I can't say that either. One of them said that I didn't make it clear that Joseph didn't have a tribe. Well, I looked at my script and I thought, yes, I did. I said that Joseph's children became the 12 tribes. But then, of course, I didn't explain that Joseph at the time didn't have a tribe. He was a tribe. There is no tribe of Joseph. So you do understand it's Joseph's sons when we talk about Reuben and Gad and Manasseh and Levi, Judah and all the rest of it. Of course, you knew that. Okay. The other thing I want to expound on a little bit is that I keep talking about the source J and the source E like they were two different books. And initially they were two different books. We don't see it that way when we see the Bible because they've been merged. We understand that. It's two books pushed together. What we're doing is splitting them apart so we can explain why different things sound different, but they're about the same things. And since nobody seems to have published that, and I've been looking around for a book that actually splits up J and E in a parallel, I believe you've seen some of these Bibles that have a King James here and the Greek translation there, and then, you know, the interlinear, that, you know, 3 columns on a page. So you can see what the original Greek was and what King James said it was and what the latest Bible translation says. It's the same sort of thing, J, E, and P. And so you know, obviously you'll see 4 verses from the J version, maybe 6 from E, and then they both agree, they're both the same, and then they change again. So it's really fascinating to see how skillfully, and I will say that, how skillfully this is all put together. Okay, so we were talking at the end of last week about what were these two documents. Was J, the source J document, a Judean court document, you know, one that was kept updated by the king's court, an account of all the traditions, the history, the traditions, the religious side of things, you know, all the stories and everything, with a particular emphasis on the J side. But then if you do that, then King Jeroboam's court in Shechem has to be the same, has to have something similar, because, you know, if you say, well, we're a kingdom too, you know, then where's your book? Where's your traditions? Well, here they are. And so, and as I said, as we finished last week, maybe the other way around. Maybe when the tribes split, the northern tribes split, they thought, hey, we need a document here that lists everything and gives credibility to our kingdom. And then Judah thought, ooh, you know, look what they're doing. We better get the same. I don't know. I don't think scholars know either. We don't know. We have some ideas, and we'll come to that later in the program, about the times they were written. But the interesting thing is they both have the same sort of style to them. As they try to conform to sort of, people say, oh, there's a book in Judah about its history. Oh, we got one of those. Look at that, you know. And it's very similar. We know, or we think we know, that the author of E was probably a male priest from Shiloh. And I'll explain why I said male. Well, I can explain it now. Basically, it was a priest from Shiloh. He was male. Women didn't have a lot of power or effect or a tradition of being involved in anything in the northern kingdom. It's harder to judge about the J side, the Judah side, because in Judah, surprisingly enough, men and women had power and position. A lot of powerful women in Judah in those days. And the other thing is, and if you look at it carefully, the J stories are more concerned with women. It's a fact. Trust me, it is. They're more sensitive to women. They tend to put the woman's point of view much more than the E documents do. I mean, there's nothing in E, in the E Northern Kingdom documents, to compare with the story of the woman Tamar in Genesis 38. Nothing at all. Nothing like it. It's a wonderful story. Okay, you don't know what it is? Fine. Homework this week, Genesis 38. Okay? So when did these writers live and write? I mean, we talk a lot about these two different sources. When did they live and do things? I mean, the J document does in fact refer to the assimilation of Simeon and Levi. It talks about how they are, merged into the Judah tribe and, become the one big tribe. But they don't talk about the other tribes splitting away. Now, there's two reasons for that. Possibly because they don't want to say anything about it, because it was not particularly a good thing for them to have happened, or maybe it hadn't happened yet. But I don't think that's likely, since they're more or less written around the same time, it seems. But it had to be written, obviously, J, before the Assyrians attacked the northern kingdom and dispersed them in 722. We're talking about BC, okay? I mean, it could have been written as early as David's time. It could have been. Which is why I didn't mention the tribes. Especially when you think about its emphasis on the Ark and all those traditions and things like that. It's possible. But it was probably written then between 848, 722, okay? In that period of time. Excuse me. Still can't get rid of that cold. The author of E was composed in Israel. Obviously, we recognize that. And Israel existed between 922 and 722. But here's the thing. When the Assyrians attacked Israel, and it looked like they were going to lose, which of course they did, okay, and what the Assyrians did was took a lot of Israel, the northern tribes, into captivity and rehabilitated them in other places, and a lot of Assyrians moved into Israel and took over the farms and the houses and that sort of thing. So they dispersed the tribes. In other words, the Assyrians' view was, if these guys can't get together, they can't be any threat to us. And that's where we get this 10 lost tribes business. Okay? But you can imagine what happened when the northern tribes learnt or found out what Assyria was doing, because it obviously didn't happen overnight. It took some time. So the word gets out, hey, they're taking us all to Assyria. So a lot of the northern tribes would have made a beeline for Judah, for refugees. Again, we're not talking about a very big place. Just to remind you, there are counties in this country bigger than the whole country of Israel. So we're not talking about a huge place. So they wouldn't have to, 500 miles of trekking across country to get to Judah. It's just down the road, okay? And if they did that, obviously they did do that, if they did that, then they brought their version of the Bible or the Torah with them. So they brought the E document with them. I mean, the Israelites were kin. I mean, they're related. I mean, I don't know how it worked. I mean, obviously in the first few years, I imagine it was difficult because people had relations on both sides. But they were 200 years apart, but they were kin. They were related to each other. And in the same way, if they put a border up between the north and the south, if the civil war in this country had been fought to a standstill and neither side had won, then there'd be a line across the country, and there'd be South American states and North American states. But people would be related. You've got Uncle Joe lives in Baltimore, and somebody else lives in Savannah. So they were kin. So that not only that, they spoke the same language, Hebrew. Now, I'm not sure whether the northern and the southern states spoke the same language. Probably going to get trouble for that. But I mean, they spoke the same language. They had the same God. Okay? They shared the same ancestral traditions. And the history of the Exodus and the wilderness and all that sort of thing were all the same. But what do you do with two differing accounts? You know, somebody comes up to read the Torah one Saturday in somewhere in Judah, and they read from the E document, and somebody says, wait a minute, that's not in ours. It's like having two different Bibles. Somebody saying, well, mine doesn't say that. So what to do? Well, obviously combine them. I mean, that makes sense. I imagine that's the first thing anyone say was merge them together. But then somebody said, well, why not just make one of them the official copy, like the Judah J is the official copy, and this is another one. All right? Well, that sounds like a plan, but both of them are too well known. Now, I'm sure that the number of northern tribes people who came to Judah didn't exceed the number of people in Judah already, obviously. But there was certainly a lot of them. And you've got to remember, too, that neither of them today, I mean, it's hard for us to compare these, because neither the J source and the E source today are complete in their entirety. What we've got is the bits that were merged together. There must be whole gobs of it missing when they did that. You know, when they cut out this bit and put this bit in there and that bit, you know, we don't see the two documents. It'd be quite wonderful, perhaps, if we could dig up a scroll in northern Israel today that stemmed from the time of the two kingdoms, and have a complete copy of E and a complete copy of J from the Judean side. Make life a lot easier for students, for scholars. At least we'd have it in front of us. So there would be, if you had both of them existing, you know, the master and the other copy, there'd be a challenge to the authenticity of both of them. Joining the two together was a masterstroke, because it tied both the religious and the political realities of the day. Let's say a third of Judah, let's say, just an example, a third of the people living in Judah after 722 were Northern Kingdom refugees. Even though it's a small country and small numbers of people, that's a lot of people. By combining the two sources together into one document, you dealt with the religious side of things and also the political side. Don't forget, although the king was king, he was only king by the grace of God and the prophets. So joining the two together was a masterstroke, and it reflected in a large way the reuniting of the communities together, if you like, almost like joining Judah and Israel back together again. It wasn't quite like that, but for another couple of hundred years it was. So this didn't happen overnight, of course. It took some time. And yet, even at this point, you know, you're still waiting for me to tell you who wrote the Bible, and we still can't pinpoint the writer or writers yet. And I've got in my script here a great big yet, because it will happen. Stay with me, okay? However, in this next source that we're going to talk about, there's another one, we can actually pinpoint the writer. It's not going to happen this week, I tell you that, but we can pinpoint who the writer was. After 722, Judah is obviously half the size. There's no northern kingdoms, just Judah. It's not really half the size. It's the same size, more people in it, right? But it's not as wealthy and as big and as important as it once was. It's in a real position of weakness. It really is. It is a vassal to the Assyrians. The Assyrians didn't conquer Judah because Judah paid tribute. So it's a vassal to the Assyrian Empire. And because of that, the Bible says that pagan gods started to appear in the temple. Now let's talk about that for a minute. It's not as if the minute the Assyrians became the sort of lords and masters, that Judah went ballistically pagan. It's the same thing as when one country conquers another one, at least back before modern days. What happened was the flag of the conquering country flew above or on a higher mast than the flag of the conquered country, if the conquered country flew a flag at all. In a religious theocracy like Judah, what the Assyrians would have done is insisted that effigies of their god be in the temple alongside the ones of the Judah's normal temple gods, because their point would have been, hey, we conquered you, or we're not conquered you, we own you. So come on, wherever you go and see your God, you're going to see our God as well. It was a normal practice of things to do. Now, obviously, a lot of people in Judah, because if you read the history of the kings and queens, kings of Judah and of Israel, you have all this business about the people going to the high places to worship and people having pagan images and that. It seems to me most of the Israelites were only too quick to go back to the local pagan gods when things went wrong. A bit like we are today. We're all staunch, solid Christians until things go wrong, and then we look for something else to blame, don't we? So Judah is a client state, if you will, of Assyria. Okay? And for the first time since the David covenant with God, you know, you and your descendants will be kings of this country forever and ever because I'm with you. There looms the possibility of a failure. Hey, you know, what happened to the covenant? We look like we're going downhill fast. A really bad situation. Another big thing that happened too was the tribal leader system went away. There's no role for tribal leaders when you're the client state or a vassal state, somebody else. You don't get to say what happens. They do. So we have the input of the tribal leaders in affairs of, you know, law and this sort of thing diminished. In addition to that, we now got a whole bunch of northern Levite priests who got shabbily treated in the northern kingdom but couldn't go anywhere else, and now in the southern kingdom, Judah, and in competition with the southern Aaronites. Now, I explained this a couple of weeks ago. The southern kingdom's priests claimed their descendancy from Aaron, the chief priest, high priest of Moses' time. Levites claimed their descendancy from Moses, because Moses was from the tribe of Levi. Now, most of the Levites were in the northern kingdom, but they weren't real happy about the way Jeroboam was doing things. So when they got to the southern kingdom, they think, hey, things are being done here in a good way. Then they find out that the Aaronite priests don't worship the way they do, don't hold the same religious heroes as they do. Even the stories are different. So there's a lot of friction there. And now we get J and E combined. So it's a joint recollection of the nation's sacred practices, if you will. But there's the beginning of the friction between the two loads of priests. But it's been combined. You know, I'm sure there were arguments over how much was E and how much was J, and you got more in there than we did, or vice versa. But it's done. And it starts the Bible building up into the Bible we know today. But now there's another source we need to consider. First, a bit of history. Don't you love history? King Hezekiah, you can look him up in the Bible. He ruled from 715 to 687. He's mentioned in Isaiah, in Kings, Chronicles, so we know, a bit about him. He did a lot of good. He abolished the pagan worshippers, and he came back to this one worship place. You can only worship in the temple. You can only sacrifice in the temple. Now, you're going to see later on this caused a lot of problems, but he did good. He tried to get Israel, or Judah rather, back on track, back on worshipping God, the right way. And one of the big things he did was he had all the sacrifices done in the temple. Now let me just explain something about sacrifices. We tend to think people taking perfectly good animals up to the altar, sacrificed, put on the fire, a bit was put fire for the priests, and the rest of it was gone. Nothing could be further from the truth. The Israelites had this thing, if you're going, we need to eat meat, we need to kill animals, but if we're going to do it, we're going to do it with acknowledging the fact we're spilling blood and doing it with a certain amount of reverence. So you went to the priest, he killed the animal, he took his portion, you took your bit and went home and cooked it, or it was cooked there for you. It was to eat, not to throw carcasses just on the fire. People get the impression that they were killing off their livestock and throwing it on the fire for no good reason. And we'll come to that again a little bit later on, probably next week. Hezekiah also smashed the snake totem that Moses had during the wilderness, where there were too many snakes around. If you looked at the snake, you wouldn't get bitten. Now, this was a big move. This was a treasured remnant, if you will, of Moses, something Moses had actually held, and yet he destroyed it because it smacked of idolatry. So Hezekiah brought in a lot of changes, okay? And then what he did was he rebelled against the Assyrians. Well, that didn't do very well. The Bible talks a bit about it. It says how they came in and attacked all the cities, including Lachish. And it's kind of interesting because at Lachish, there is a ramp. Archaeologists have dug up a lot around there. There was a ramp. They couldn't get into the city because on top of a hill. And so much like the story of Masada, only hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years earlier, the Assyrians built a ramp to get them up over the wall and finally, conquer. And Jerusalem was under siege. Now, the Bible says that during the night, all the Assyrians were stricken, or half the Assyrians were stricken with some disease, and most of them died, and the rest of them slunk off with their tails between their legs. Okay. Well, they have found in Nineveh. It's a prism, a four-sided triangle, a pyramid thing called the prism, which actually has the account of the siege of Jerusalem from the other side. So you've got the Assyrians' account carved down in stone, and the bits and pieces from Kings and Isaiah and Chronicles. So it's kind of interesting because in the Assyrian side, they got all the way there, terrified the Israelites so badly, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, that they offered tribute, and he took wads of money and things like that home with him and left them as they were with a lesson taught. If you read the J source, they were stricken with sickness and went away. Who's right? if you read the Assyrian one very carefully, there's a few things not quite right. It's like he came home having suffered a bit of a setback, whatever it was, and tried to make told his side of the story first. So we don't know, which only goes to show that sometimes, when you've got history against religious history, they don't always match up. Anyway, that's subject for another program, but read up about the Nineveh prison, because there's some interesting stuff on that. Anyway, Hezekiah's son, because Hezekiah's killed, Hezekiah's son and his grandson also pretty much failed in what they did, and they let, again, pagan gods back in the temple. But as I said, maybe from pressure from before to do, what the conquerors want you to do. But they didn't do very well, okay? And then we come to a major turning point in the whole history of this Bible writing thing, because here comes Josiah. Now, the thing you can say about Josiah, and the writer of J at the time says it, is that he did good. Josiah went back to what King Hezekiah did and tried, and in fact did, restore the religion back to the country. Got rid of the idols, got rid of the high places of worship, these places up in the hills and things, and very firmly put the Israelites, Judah, back on the track. And you'll have to stay next week to find out how that was done. Don't forget to read your Bible. Good night and God bless.